Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Welcome to Secrets of Organ Playing podcast number 103. Today is Sunday, July 16th, 2017, and today's guest is an American organist, Daniel Segner, the director of music at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Glen, Ellyn, Illinois. Daniel is a graduate of Valparaiso University, where he earned his Bachelor of Music degree in church music and organ performance. Most recently, he served as Principal Organist for the First United Methodist Church at Chicago Temple in Chicago. Daniel currently teaches piano, organ, and voice. Some of his notable past performances have included the opening recital for the pipe organ in Cantor, guest artist for Paul Manz organ recital series, and recitalist for the organ rededication service at Augustana Lutheran Church in Hobart, Indiana. Collaborations have included performances with Chorus Angelorum, Civitas, and with the Valparaiso University Symphony and LaPorte Symphony Orchestras. In 2015, he performed alongside the Valparaiso University Chorale in their summer tour of Germany, where he played in Luebeck, Jueterbog, and Leipzig. While at Valparaiso University, Daniel received the Ronald G. Reidenbach Prize in Church Music and the Signature Artist Award. He's an active member of the AGO and American Choral Directors of America and the Organ Historical Society. In this conversation, Daniel shares his insights about knowing your instrument well, being really good at one thing, and becoming an advocate of pipe organ. Let's go to the show.
So, Daniel, I'm so delighted we're finally having this conversation. You are in Illinois and I'm in Lithuania. We are about, 7 or 8 hours apart, probably. Mm-hmm. And it's a big time difference. And we are having a wonderful day here in Lithuania. How is the weather in Illinois, by the way?
It's perfect. It's 9 a.m. in the morning. It's great here.
I like to imagine that we're having a virtual cup of cappuccino with our guests, talking and chatting about the things that we both enjoy and love. About pipe organ, that's wonderful, right?
Exactly,
your how you first fell in love with this instrument, and your challenges. Maybe something is difficult, right? And you overcome those challenges. Those will be the things that our listeners will enjoy the most, because they are struggling with similar things that we are too, right? Or we were in the past. So any advice and inspiration you can give to them will be very, very appreciated. Thank you so much, Daniel, for joining me in this conversation. You're very generous with your time and wisdom, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here.
So, how about this early story? Do you remember how you first fell in love with the organ? Can you share with us?
Well, so I started out singing in a men and boys choir in Indianapolis, Indiana, at Christ Church Cathedral, under the direction of organist and choir master, a former organist and choir master, Dr. Frederick Burgermaster. So I came into the organ from the choral side of things. And at that church, we were really lucky. There are two huge instruments, tracker action. One is in sort of the French style and one's sort of the German Baroque. The front organ that mostly accompanies the service, it was this huge Wolf instrument. So we would be in the choir stalls with this huge organ on either side of us. And then in the back would be this, German Baroque Taylor and Booty instrument. And all of these organs were possible through this really generous foundation in the city of Indianapolis that made these instruments possible. And so, not only because I was singing with the instruments, but because, we had really fine musicians who were playing them. So Dr. Frederick Burgermaster he's a titan of the the choral world and also the organ world. But really it was his assistants who really spoke to me the most. So when I first started, Alistair Reed was one of the organists, and then it was Marco Petricic, and then David Sendin. And David Sendin and Marco Petricic were my teachers for various points throughout my career. So when I was about 10 or 11 is when I really started to fall in love with the organ. And, I took piano and all of that, and I realized that I wanted to play lots of instruments all at the same time. So organ was the best vessel for it. And it's easy to get inspired when you see such a magnificent instrument every day, basically. So, that's really how it started, was being in the choral side of things with magnificent instruments with incredible players.
It's good you mentioned those mentors, right? Early mentors that probably made a big influence on you and your personality as well in the future, right? So without those people, probably any of us wouldn't be where we are, right? Those mentors. And sometimes young people come up to us right now, right? And ask for advice and expertise, right? Give some tips and share some knowledge. And today we're sort of also can become mentors to youngsters, right? To younger students and peers sometimes even, which is very, very valuable. Then we remember when we were little, right? The same reverse position, right? They come up to us to look up for inspiration. And I think that's very generous if people can do this, with their time and knowledge and expertise, because it moves us forward.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. So Daniel, did you have any other interests beside music when you were little?
Some. I tried doing sports and all of that. When I mostly through in school, I was big into scouting, and I did a lot of camping. I spent most of my high school career hiking and being in the outdoors, wilderness survival, things like that. Once I went off to college, that part of my life really fell off because music became basically everything. But I think what I really liked about my other activities besides music was that I don't think I realized it until I was pretty far into my career that basically everything that I did was somehow connected in some way to back to the organ and to music in general. So yeah, in general, when you sing downtown in the city for this choir, it was a pretty demanding experience. We would sing 2 broadcasted services each week. So we'd sing Thursday night, broadcasted evensong service in the Anglican tradition. And then Sunday morning we had the 11 a.m. service. And so, having to do basically new settings of all the canticles and singing all of that became sort of, especially when you get to the sort of the upper level of the choir and you're expected to have a better command of the music, it really sort of does just take over a lot of your life. And so that's why I didn't really do a whole lot besides music in that regard, at least.
It seems to me, Daniel, that people who are introduced to the choir and vocal music at early age can become better musicians, don't you think?
Something like that. I find that especially when it comes to playing hymns and understanding the need to breathe, because I always tell people that the hardest part about playing the organ is playing the hymns, because you have to think of the instrument as a living, breathing thing, because it is. The organ has a huge lung in it that's producing all of that air. And I think one of the things that's always sort of set me apart was that because I grew up singing the hymns, and especially at a really high level in this choir, that I really felt like I could embody the hymns and the texts when I accompanied them, when I was sort of playing full time at that point. Absolutely. Being at the choral side of things, I think, is a really helpful aspect of your musicianship that shouldn't ever be disregarded, especially when you're playing the organ.
And even if you are later in life, if you have an opportunity to join the choir, it never hurts, right? Because you learn sight reading, you learn to develop your pitch, right? Air. It's like a form of air training, right? You do solfege probably in those choir schools. How was it with sight reading, by the way, early on with you? Did you practice sight reading?
Sight reading's always been one of my actually favorite things. My students that I teach don't seem to like it as much as I did, but maybe that was because I don't know. I had that choral thing as well. So when it came to switching to the piano and organ, it was it made sense to do all the sight reading things. But I've always loved sight reading and singing, especially. Sight reading is really, really easy for me, especially when I do Bach and the Baroque, late Baroque era, because there's rules in how you sing, and especially when you're singing tenor or bass, there's only a few places your voice, your part can go, and so knowing all those things is really helpful to sing when you're singing that one line all by yourself, because if you have to turn the page real fast, your part can only go a few directions anyway. It's not like in some of the modern compositions where all the rules are out the window and you could possibly be singing or playing whatever next. And that really translated well to when I was playing full-time as an organist and as a keyboardist, is that, knowing the rules helps when you're sight reading, because you can just... Because, when you're sight reading, you're not expected to have like mastery of any of the subject. You're expected to just go on through, and what happens is what happens. And as long as you keep moving, it's, you're doing fine.
It's like connected with some form of musical intuition, right? You feel or you sense what is coming up next, right? So right now you're an organist, you're dealing with this all the time, right? Sight reading and learning new work, which is also part of the training too. So I think it's very, very good to sing those single melodic lines. Even today, probably not too many people do that, but sing each line in a choral prelude, let's say, or a fugue, right? Literally sing with your lungs, and that gives you a lot of insight how the piece is constructed.
Exactly. I can't remember who of my teachers used to tell me, but one of them said when I was attempting to first memorize a fugue, they used to tell me that the best way, if you know it, is if you can play it away from the keyboard, play one part, and then sing the second voice without playing it. So, away like on a desk, and then try to hum the second theme as it comes in. I don't know about that I ever necessarily succeeded in doing that, but it's an interesting way to think about how you can connect your voice to your ear to what you're playing.
Because four voices in a fugue, like in the traditional fugue, are like four people having a conversation, right? At any given point, one voice is more dominant than the others, right? More pronounced, maybe. Sometimes two if they have a duet, right? But other two are stationary or listening, right? Or even resting with rest. So it reminds us of real musical conversation, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and the more that you can think about fugues as independent voice parts, the better. I mean, and I tell my choir this all the time. It's not a battle; we're a team, and we have to sound together and in sort of a single sort of wall of sound. And especially when it comes to playing fugues, I mean, I've always really appreciated whenever I hear recordings of other organists as well, is that, it's not just that they have a command of the fugue, it's that they have a command of the musicality of the fugue. That is, if you're going to do one sort of, if you're going to do a lift at one point in the fugue, there better be that same lift in every single voice, every single time it comes in. It comes back to the fundamentals of what it sounds like, because that's how a singer would do, or that's how an instrument would play it, is that they would do exactly the same thing, because it's not for independent voices, it's for the same voices coming in at different points saying the same thing. It's a real, that's why fugues are so interesting to listen to, and when played really well, it's like a chamber ensemble. I completely agree with that.
When you mentioned learning fugue voice by voice, it reminded me of the technique that my professor George Ritchie, who is now retired from UNL, he also learned this technique from the German blind organist Helmut Walscher. Mm-hmm. And when you're blind, you have to develop some other techniques, how to memorize things, right? How to play. And one of the things that he learned, Helmut, was playing voice by voice, and maybe a short fragment, right? Maybe like a couple of measures, and then assistant or a student of his would play another voice, and then he would play back, and the third voice, and play back, and the fourth voice, and so forth, and then Walcha would play combinations of those voices, right? And that's how he would discover how the piece is put together, basically fragment by fragment, but also line by line.
Right.
Yeah. And also, when he was later in life, Walcha was very famous for his Bach recordings, right, on historical German organs. Later in life, when he was playing, let's say, a prelude and fugue on another organ, which he learned in his youth, perhaps, he just asked his student, in this fragment, like measure 22, the alto, is it a quarter note or a dotted 8th note and a 16-note rest? You see? Those details, maybe they escaped him, whether articulation was this way or that way. But other than that, he knew the pieces inside out because of his method of learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very strenuous. I don't do this. I only learned this with this method one piece. This was the fugue by Bach from C major prelude and fugue, BWV number 547. The fugue only, the 5-part fugue, where the pedals comes in later on with augmentation. Dr. Rich told me, you should learn just one piece, just to get a feeling what it feels like to be in Helmut Walscher's shoes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So Daniel, how do you learn pieces today? Is it different from your early days, right? The methods that you apply today. How do you start learning a musical organ piece?
Well, it depends on the difficulty of the piece. I mean, especially when I was younger, I did that puzzle piece instead. I did the sculpture instead of puzzle piece method, where when you're building a sculpture, you just sort of chip away at it until you have the picture that you want. Now, more so now, I do sort of this puzzle piece idea where I just take little fragments out of context and work on them, things that I know that I can't just sight read my way through, and I really work on them. And what I do is I especially now, and I think a lot of things they don't tell you in school, especially in college and in grad school and things like that, is that when you're out in the real world and you have other things going on besides just playing, your practice time is very valuable, and you don't have a lot of time to waste, goofing off as much as we might have or may not have. I mean, I don't know about what other people did necessarily. But nowadays when I practice, I go in with a specific goal, and I practice really hard on what my goals are, and I don't stop until I've met them. And my pieces really sort of, I don't really start putting together something until about a week or two before I have to play it for real. I allow the little pieces to sort of brew and percolate for a little while, because when you have a puzzle and you're putting it all together, you always start with the corner pieces, then you have all the sort of middle section, and then you just sort of, everything sort of lies flat and in place. And if you've done your preparation correctly, the piece always comes together. And that's sort of been my experience, is that, and even in my more difficult pieces, that's been what's most helpful to me. Especially in the last year, I would say, with, how crazy the professional world is, in terms of practicing, because there's not just, practicing demands on you. There are other things. There's administrative work. There's rehearsals. So your personal practice time to learn pieces, especially pieces you're not going to end up playing in church, for instance, those have to take a very sort of specific, plan of action to get them done, because otherwise you'll fall into your old habits, which in my case were just playing it from the beginning and each week and hoping that it would improve each time. And it doesn't. That's what happens. It doesn't really get better. You have to really focus on what you're going to do, have a plan, say, I'm going to work from measure 17 to 20. And it's just going to be those 3 measures because they're super hard. There's 3 registration changes. I have to change manuals. The box has to close on measure 14 or what, so all of these things you have to really take apart piece by piece, because your brain really shouldn't have to handle that much. It needs to be a little bit more intuitive. So taking things apart is really the way that I practice now.
It's probably related to what Bruce Lee said. Do you know the famous martial artist Bruce Lee? He said, I'll have a citation here. He said, I don't fear a man who practices 1,000 kicks in one day. Mm-hmm. I fear a man who practices 1 kick in 1,000 days.
You see? Yeah.
Right? Just 1 kick, one technique, right? And over maybe 3 years, he would perfect it. So that's the same with what you're talking about. It's probably better to learn 3 measures or 4 measures at a time in your entire practice session for the day, but master it thoroughly, right? That tomorrow it will be another fragment, right? You just have to refresh it perhaps a few times. Then, as you say, going from the beginning until the end and hoping that somehow it will become better, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
And do this in fragments, but it's so exceedingly difficult for the mind to do this, because as a musician, if you have a musical and intuition, right, you love the organ not because of this little fragment. You love this piece because of the entirety, right?
Exactly.
So you want to play it all the way through. But you have to postpone this pleasure for later, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And that makes the learning process really solid in your mind if you put the work into it, because the more that you practice something the same way, it becomes sort of ingrained in you. And I think there's sort of, we kind of get in, when you practice the same thing over again, you sometimes can fall into that muscle memory thing versus actually memorizing something. And so, I think a lot of teachers give this advice, and certainly my teachers gave me this advice. But, if you're ever working on something for too long, you start putting pieces ahead of it and pieces after it, go back 1 measure or add a measure after it. And it'll change the way that you play it, because you're having to think about, this other thing. And suddenly you're allowing your mind to just sort of expand a little bit. Because, one of the things that happens in the learning process, not only with just putting the pieces together, is that if you allow your muscle memory to sort of run rampant when you practice little pieces over and over again, the whole piece is in this constant danger of falling apart, because, what if you get to the end of and it's time for you to play your piece at the concert or at the service, and all of a sudden you're really nervous, you'll fall into these muscle memory techniques, and suddenly it won't, the piece won't be there anymore. And you'll have all these errors that you've never made before. And so, I guess sort of my caveat to practicing all of your little pieces is that you should put some of them in context a little bit, and also, with your advice as well, is that you really should try to deny yourself the satisfaction of playing the entire piece until you can get all the little pieces all together there, because once you start putting into context, you've started to really set it in stone, and that can be a dangerous aspect for your brain to sort of wrap your head around the piece.
Daniel, I think we have to point out another thing here, issue, that we need also to practice sight reading too, right? Playing unfamiliar pieces from the beginning until the end without starting. That's another part of our practice. But that's another goal, right? To learn new music, to learn to sight read, to become better at adapting to new situations, unfamiliar environments, right? Right. And if you constantly just learning form measures at a time and constantly drilling, it's not the same as sight reading, right?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah,
because
I agree.
in real life, you will get presented with another piece, and you have to adapt quickly and learn maybe in a weekend, or hymn, sight read a hymn. Your organist would want to play it, or choir director put it in front of you, and you just have to do this, right away. How important, Daniel, is music theory and harmony skills for you when you play the music and sight read it and practice? Do you pay attention to that?
If I'm being honest, I need to be spending a lot more time on harmonic analysis of pieces. I sort of sink into in sort of very surface analysis of things, especially if you're working on like a sonata or things like that. You're going to be looking at sort of generalized things, like this is the exposition. All right, if you notice in the left hand, this is where theme A comes back in, and I'll do a very sort of surface, and I don't really get into the harmonies nearly as much as I probably should. I think the last really serious harmonic dictation I ever did of a piece was when I played, maybe right after college, I played Messiaen's Du Parmi, and I did a harmonic analysis of the toccata section. But I mean, arguably it's really helpful because, especially if you're good at music theory, knowing that, there, again, it goes back to the, singing Baroque music or playing Baroque music, there are rules. So having a really solid understanding of harmonic analysis means that, when one chord presents itself and as you're getting closer to a cadence, right, there's only so many options that are reasonable. If it's a good composer and if they're not being strange or, wanting to really trick you. There are only a few places they can go. I would say that one composer that's kind of interesting to sight read every now and then is if you do any of the sonatas by René Becker. And if you try to sight read, like, for instance, if you do, I think it's maybe sonata number 2, like the fourth movement is the prayer movement. It does not make sense harmonically. It always does these sort of false cadences, like you think it's going to resolve at some point, but it just sort of keeps going. It's a strange. Some of the music can be. It's a little bit bizarre, but it's great sight reading music because it does really keep you on your toes. Yeah.
Yeah. The more variety you add in your sight reading repertoire, or even practice repertoire, the better, probably, right? You don't want to become a one-sided organist, a specialist, although there is certain benefit in being a specialist, right? Playing just romantic music, or just, let's say, Dutch music, or music of certain composers, being the best in the world at playing Reger, right?
Right.
Or Messiaen. There is a certain, sometimes, benefit to that. But for general education, if you are just starting out as an organist, I think it's better to have a variety, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And, I would say to put off a specialty as long as you can. I think you should enjoy the things that you enjoy, but having sort of as much of a breadth of knowledge of the music will make you better at what you then eventually want to be super good at. I mean, if you want to be the next Reger expert, if you want to be the next Bach expert, it's probably important that you also have played Buxtehude and Mendelssohn and, modern composers. You could do Leclerc and Rorem. So I think you're right. I mean, you should, generally, you should have at least an understanding of most of the styles that are written for the organ. And then, there are a lot of advantages to having a specialty, but being able to play in every style is a significant help to you in the future, and especially in the professional world, because the musical world, especially in America, it's changing, and it's gotten a lot wider in its interests musically, and being a diverse musician is an absolute necessity. And especially as us organists, with an instrument that can be really difficult to play, and also to really, as an audience member, can sometimes be difficult to listen to. We always have to find ways in which we can engage the people in which we are playing for, and for the reasons in which we play. So having a really broad understanding of the instrument and of the different styles that should be at least the number one or number two goal of any organist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very basic knowledge, right, of those stylistic differences between the historical periods: Renaissance, right, Baroque, Classical, Romantic, and Modern. At least 5 styles, right? Mm-hmm. We don't get into Middle Ages so much because it's very limited, right? Its use is very limited. But the Renaissance is wonderful treasury of organ music, right? Baroque, even more, right? The golden ages of organ repertoire. And I think you're right, because when you get into real situations, there are many benefits, right? When you have a lot of repertoire under your belt, a lot of variety. Not only because people will appreciate your recitals more if you have variety, right? Or in church service situation, you play a few hymn preludes, choral preludes based on the Brahms setting and style, or in Buxtehude setting, right? Not just one unique style.
Right.
That's one side. But another, I think, advantage is that some people, like to create, like to compose music and improvise, right? And then you can emulate the styles of 10, 20, 100 composers that came before you. And the more music you emulate there, the more original you become, right?
Right. Exactly. Some of the best organists that I know are master improvisers, and it's not just because they have an understanding of all these different musical styles based on, what really boils down to really common musical knowledge. Understanding when you should bring in an exposition, why does the 5 always go to 1, all those things. It's also the way that they can emulate different styles to really make, especially a whole church service, really sort of cohesive. They might do a Baroque introduction to some hymn, or like a really romantic one to another hymn, or take a modern, hymn that has sort of, weird rhythms, it has, a bizarre time signature or whatever, and bring elements of the entire service into its presentation is really an engaging way to play. Definitely.
Yeah. So I think our listeners now, understand or will understand the need to study a variety, at least 5 styles, right? And
at least
maybe even more, because German Baroque and French Baroque is not the same thing, right? And Italian and Spanish is also different, right? When we get into historical schools of organ composition, we can get even lost there, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Variety, right? The more the better. So Daniel, we just started and touched upon your current activities, right? How your sight reading abilities and your training can really, be put into practice into church service situations. Can you tell us a little bit what it is you do nowadays during your week and your responsibilities, basically?
Sure. I currently serve as the director of music for a small Episcopal church in Illinois, and before then, so this is my second year out of undergraduate. I got my bachelor's of music at Valparaiso University, and right out after school, I was the principal organist for a church in the city of Chicago, and that was sort of where I really more reality sort of hit me in the face about knowing a lot of different styles, because in that specific church and in lots of denominations really in America especially, they want a very wide variety of music. So, suddenly I, was playing jazz on the piano or jazz on the organ, which I'd never really done before, and playing in the gospel style as well. So, I was playing in styles that I didn't really know and wasn't really especially comfortable with. And what I learned from that experience was that the organ is capable of doing every style, any style that you need. It's just, you just have to approach it as just a new thing that you're learning, a new style of playing that you need to know. And what ended up happening was I found that I had all of these other experiences and skills that I wasn't really using just being a principal organist. So I found a job out in the suburbs of Chicago where I could take on a role as a director of music. And there I have an adult choir that I conduct each week, and they sing for one service on Sundays. I have 3 services, and my assistant plays the 9:15 service, and I play the 8 a.m. and the 10:30. The 10:30 service, it's a full Eucharist service with choir, and they sing psalm, sometimes like an antiphonal piece, and then obviously the offertory piece. And, part of being an organist in the States is really a kind of a jack of all trades situation where you don't necessarily have to have choral experience, but the more you have, and this goes back to us talking about, singing in a choir is good for you. It really is, because you'll be thrown in front of a choir. You definitely will. At any church you go to, whether it is that you're conducting or if you're just playing, having that background is really helpful. And I had always sort of had aspirations to be a choral conductor. Eventually, I'd like to work in a cathedral somewhere. But, for now, I've found a lot of joy in basically having my little choir that I have. I have 25 singers. And but we do pretty serious music for what we are, really. And we have this just delightful 30-rank instrument. And, you can do a lot with a little. And my job really has been to sort of revitalize the program, which has had a really storied past. I replaced somebody who he retired after 30 years. So, I'm coming in as a very, very young person into a place that has had just a titan of the music industry, of the organ industry. He defined their generations of parishioners. So it's been a really amazing transition into that. And I think all of the experiences that I've had as a choral musician, going to college and having sort of this exposure to this huge variety of music, and then sort of being eased into the professional life by starting out as purely an organist. All I did was accompany chamber groups and choirs. I did nothing else. I did no choirs, nothing. And then transitioning finally into this job that I have now really was a wonderful transition into sort of professional life where, I do all the administrative work. I prepare the bulletins, obviously, each week. And, I think one aspect of my professional life is that now I teach sort of basic piano now, which has been a real pleasure because I had a professor, my harpsichord teacher in college, always told me that you probably don't truly understand something until you've had to teach it to somebody. And I got to tell you, I thought I understood the piano pretty well, but now that I'm teaching it, it's a totally different game for sure to really, I mean, because all the things that we think about as musicians sort of becomes ingrained in us. It's like, it's part of who we are. And so having to sort of pull out that drawer and explain all the items in it, it's surprisingly difficult. And any opportunity that we as musicians have to explain to somebody or to teach somebody about what we do really keeps you from being sort of caught up in yourself. And you can sort of, you can take a lot of things for granted. For instance, I'm teaching a student right now. She's on her first Bach invention. So it's a really big deal for her. And it's a big deal for me. And there are things like articulation that, you know, that we take for granted because it's been so ingrained in us that we've taught it and practiced it, but having to explain it to somebody new who's had no idea, has no concept of what we're talking about, it's an amazing thing. And I think not only does it make me appreciate the things that I know, but it makes me appreciate the people who taught it to me and taught it to me so well that you're able to explain it. And so in terms of my professional life, I found a lot of joy in both being in sort of the active side of it, where I'm every week with a choir, with full services, conducting and playing, and all the hymns and all the service music, and then also getting to teach on the side, which both keeps me focused on what I'm doing, and also can sometimes help expose holes in your own knowledge. Because sometimes, especially when you have really younger kids, they'll try to ask you things and you'll realize that you don't have an answer for it, because you can't just say, oh, well, that's just how it is, because it's not. You have to explain all of it. And that's been probably one of the biggest delights of being a professional musician, is that you find all these things that you haven't known yet, and that you didn't realize you didn't know, or that you realized that you knew so well you didn't know how to explain it. And it really makes you, I think, a better musician and really a better person, because this is how you sort of engage with people, and engage especially people who want to learn your instrument, is that it's not just how it is, or it's you got to explain all of it. So yeah, that's basically what's been going on.
So you mentioned this girl who's learning Bach's invention, right?
Yep.
And perhaps asking, oh, teacher, could you demonstrate or explain what kind of articulation should I use? So what would you tell her?
Well, so, I mean, you have to understand, I mean, when you're talking to somebody who has sort of no understanding or like basis of the knowledge, you can't talk about like the really small nitty gritty things. You have to come at it from this sort of the broad idea of Baroque music, like that the cadences are really important, that especially when you're playing inventions, it's just the two voices. So it's not just right hand is stronger than the left hand, they're equal. And then taking that all down. And so basically what I've been doing is that we do really broad concepts about Bach and about Baroque music and articulation. And then you start to sort of take things, you sort of whittle it down until we really are now at this point getting into the nitty gritty. So like, for instance, the closer intervals are apart, the closer they are played together, and the wider the intervals, obviously the wider the space in between the two notes. So she's been enjoying those 5/1 cadences at the end of the pieces, where, you have to do the big octave leap in one hand, and you have to actually give it some pretty good space. And so, I mean, that's how really I've been approaching it, is that I've been doing sort of very broad concepts of the Baroque articulation, especially Bach's articulation. And then as she's gotten stronger with playing the piece and just getting the notes, I mean, especially when you're first learning, just getting the notes is a deal in and of itself. Then you're doing the articulation. And then what we do is, and on top of all this, right, the fingerings, obviously, I mean, she has the exact same fingerings, and I really drill it into her that, with Bach, you got to do it the same way each time, because there are other elements to Bach besides just getting all the notes, is that it's this articulation thing. So really our preeminent project has been getting the fingerings right, getting all the notes, because the more comfortable you are with all that, then we can really really get into the nitty gritty of making sure that, you're doing the right style. Like, it's not too staccato, but it's definitely not legato. So it's getting those wide variety of ranges of articulation down to that sort of exact science that Bach really is known for.
I like your idea, Daniel, about articulation when you say the closer the notes are, the closer the intervals are, right? The closest and the articulation is also, and the wider the intervals, the larger the distance between the notes, right? Basically, because it reminds me as singing, right? Basically, when you sing stepwise motion, you don't have any strenuous activity. It's very, very easy, right? And if you sing an interval or let's say arpeggio, and then it becomes very difficult, right? So when we play, probably we have to remember how it is to other instruments or violin, let's say, when we change positions, for example, or wind instruments also. When they do ta 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 with their lips, it's good to have analogies, right, from other life situations.
Exactly right, and it's helpful that a lot of my students, they also take other instruments lessons. So a lot of my students play violin and cello as well, which is really helpful because then especially when you play an instrument that's mainly in one clef, that ends up being really helpful from like a music theory standpoint, because suddenly they're trying to count all the little lines, trying to figure out what notes it is, and the more confident they get with the music, the better. But I think you're also right when it comes to how they play as well. It's they're I forgot what I was going to say. We'll erase that part.
Talking about the analogies, right? About analogies between the, let's say, organ articulation and other instruments and fingers, right? And you were going to say something.
Yes, sorry, I know what it was now. When it comes to them, especially when they're so strong in playing other instruments, you can describe, especially. This goes back to having a general knowledge of music is helpful then when you're trying to explain something to somebody who just needs that analogy to help them along, is that you can say something like, when you come into this phrase, you have to imagine it as if you're doing an up bow, right? So if you're coming in not on a strong beat, so not on 1 and 3, obviously, right? You have to imagine you're going ba-dee-da-da, right? So especially with string players, I found it's incredibly helpful to them if you say stuff like, come at this measure as if you're doing a really strong down bow into it, and you can feel them, because especially if they've had a really good teacher, which generally I think most of my students seem to have really, good fundamentals with their string teachers as well, that it helps them apply it when you can remind them of things of how all of this music can be related. Because if you say things to a string player like, if you imagine this piece like a string ensemble, how would your cello play this bass line? They would not play it just sort of blurry and all over the place. They would play it with just this particular articulation. And especially when you have to go from, the E string all the way down to the, to the furthest portion of the neck on the opposite string, right? You have to lift. You can't just blur it all the way over. You have to do all of that. And so I'm probably, especially when I'm teaching my younger students, I use analogies probably way more than I should. I think especially when I talk to them about practicing, I always tell them that you have to brush your teeth every day. And if you don't brush your teeth one day, you can't make up with it by brushing harder the next day. And it's not bad. You definitely have to practice every day. Even if it's for a little bit, you should practice every day.
Or there is another one about vitamins, right? You forget for a week to take your vitamins. And then the next one, you take 7 vitamins in a row.
Oh, no.
Get sick, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Right. It's always this middle way, right? The sort of in between of extremes. No practice and 10 hours a day of practice. And you have to use the middle way, which is sustainable in the long run.
Right. When I first start out with my really beginner students who are just starting out, especially when you're like 5 years old and you can't tell a 5-year-old, well, I don't know how it is everywhere, but especially where I am, kids are insanely busy, and it boggles my mind the amount of scheduling that some of my students have. They'll have like 10 minutes to themselves, like, ever in a week. And so, their parents really push them to play the piano, which is great to have that encouragement. But I always tell them that piano, it's not about practicing till you make perfect, right? It's perfect practice. And it doesn't, the length of time doesn't matter. It matters that you accomplished something, and that you have started on something that you know that you can finish. And what I always tell my very, very beginner students is that when you first start out, you should absolutely do at least on your very worst day, your most busy day, 10 minutes of uninterrupted, no phones, no TV. If the piano is in like a high traffic area of your house, see if it can be moved. I always tell parents that, if there could be a separate room or an area of the house that's not sort of frequently walked through that has the instrument in it, that's perfect, because you want it to be just uninterrupted time. Because as you sort of progress in music, if you're practicing every single day, and especially at an appointed amount of time, that it becomes like an issue for you if you don't practice, because you'll feel like you haven't done it, because you haven't. And I know that this is especially the case for me in college, where when I was practicing so much that I found that if I didn't practice, like it felt like my entire day was completely ruined. I mean, if I was so busy that I couldn't practice, it felt like the whole day was complete waste. Like, why am I even bothering being here if I can't practice? So, but I always tell students that, 10 minutes at the very beginning. And then as you progress, especially with my older students now, I expect obviously a lot more out of them. I expect, your bare minimum of a half an hour of really good, solid practice, not 10 minutes of sort of practicing and then 20 minutes of just goofing off, right? I mean, it's 30 minutes of solid, you have a focused playing. You start with your scales, you do your arpeggios, you do your hand and virtuoso exercises, then you do your practicing. All of that is a good amount of practicing for a day. You don't need to do 7 hours a day or whatever. I mean, that's ridiculous. You need to do your focused, energized practicing.
Yes, you're right, Daniel. People sometimes don't appreciate the value of this focus, right? They do those multitasking activities, right? The phone is on the rack and they're chatting with Facebook friends and they playing at the same time, and somebody is writing to them and they're replying and then playing with the pedals at the same time. It's not focused, right? It doesn't go anywhere. Remember this, what mastery means, right? You have to practice at least 10,000 hours, 10,000 hours totally during maybe 10 years, right? Of let's say this instrument of organ, but as you say, it has to be with intent, with focus, and always striving to be better.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. I don't know how many of your listeners are teachers, but I think this is just like my sort of aside to everything else that we've been talking about. One of my biggest complaints right now with my students is that a lot of them have metronomes on their phones, which is, I always explain to them, I mean, I do too as well, but you shouldn't use it. You should use it as like a reference point or whatever, and then you should have a totally separate metronome that's not connected to the internet or Wi-Fi or anything, just a regular metronome that you can place on this music stand with you while you practice. Because anything else, it's like an addiction. You'll definitely check your phone if your metronome is also right there on it, right? You should have totally separate devices. I mean, just separate for 10 minutes. Nothing is happening that's so important that you can't take at least 10 minutes out of your day to just completely focus on practicing.
Yes, you're right. So Daniel, did you have time to practice today?
Well, my day's just beginning, so no, I haven't practiced yet, but it's on my docket today.
But you're planning, right? What will you be practicing today, Daniel?
Well, so I will be leaving for a vacation in a week, which is really exciting for me because I don't really take very many vacations. So I'm actually going to be practicing all of my hymns for the next 2 weeks so that they're really solid underneath my belt. Because I'm not gonna be able to practice all of them away. So I'm gonna be 5 days without practicing, which is gonna be crazy. And so I'll be spending most of today practicing the hymns and the service music, and then picking out my pieces. And probably what I'll do is I'll pick some of my concert repertoire that I've played before. That's this is also a good sign that you've practice something well enough is that you should be able to pick it up, dust off the parts that are the most challenging, and then boom, you have a piece ready to go. And that's generally what I've been doing as I've been preparing for vacation, is I've been sort of looking through my old repertoire. Like I'll probably play, I might even play the Prelude and Fugue in C, the 547. That might be a good one to play. I was going to tell you that when I play that one, that's the one that has, it's 547, the fugue, that fugue.
Yeah, me too.
When I was first learning that, I was in Germany and I turned pages for the organist at the St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, and he was telling me that the organ part is only that fragment. He says that when that other voice comes in with the left hand, he plays all of that in the left hand. The pedal only plays the that fragment, right sort of in the middle. He doesn't play any other pedal part. It was really, and then he played like the other pedal fragments that didn't have subject material in them. That's all he played. And so now that's how I play it. And now every time I play it, especially now since I still take lessons, obviously, to keep my own skills going. And every time I play that, my teacher's like, it sounds so weird to do it that way. But, if you add a 16 foot in the hands, it sort of makes sense. But when you've grown so accustomed to hearing it that way, it totally changes the way the piece sounds. But so that's how I play it. Is I play it with when the fugue subject enters in the pedal portion. I play it with my left hand. So I'm playing basically two voices right in the one hand, or three voices really in the one hand as it comes in. So that was my one thing I was going to say about that earlier. But yeah,
and the prelude itself, it has very, very funny beginning. I think George Ritchie told me once that his teacher, right, the blind organist Helmut Walscher, told him about taran tan taran tan taran tan tan, and there are four measures, right, in this. Then ta 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 ta. Then the third one, tan ta 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 ta, and the fourth one is I think arpeggios downward or something. So Walscher taught Ritchie this way: singen, tanzen, spielen, and lachen. Basically,
right?
Four German words: sing, play, dance, and laugh. All those difficult, interesting melodic ideas are connected in the piece imitatively and contrapuntally, and you can even imagine which one is laughing, which one is playing, which one is dancing. This way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you can label them basically. So wonderful, delightful conversation, Daniel, today. Before we end, I was going to ask you if you had a chance to, for example, to tell your student what would be the first step to become a better organist, let's say, what would the first thing come to mind?
To know the instrument that you're playing. The organ is not a universal instrument. There's thousands of them and they're all different. There's no two instruments are the same. They have the same components, but be aware that the instrument is different for each one. And
instrument, to know the instrument inside out, right? And what about the second step? What would be the second prerequisite?
Pick one thing to be really good at. If it's going to be hymns, be the best at hymns. If it's going to be Bach, be the best at Bach. And don't ever let the other things that you have learned just fall to the wayside. Everything is always connected, and the more that you can apply your broad depth of knowledge to your singular focus will be the best thing that you can be as an organist.
And number three, what would be number three?
Number three. Not everybody likes the organ. Part of our job is to convince them that it is. It's a great instrument, and it's criminally underappreciated. It's a fantastic instrument. It's a difficult instrument, and it's a delightful instrument to listen to. So the better you are preparing your music, the more time we can spend showing people the joy and passion that we as organists have for our instrument.
Basically, you become an advocate of this instrument, right?
Exactly.
That's how you get more fans, right? From the lovers of organ music. You never forget that they are not organists. They don't know what you know, right?
Right.
And you'll be empathic, right? And feel how they feel, right? And talk their language too.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Daniel, I was thinking a little bit different when you said know your instrument really well. Then the second step I thought you would say is then know your music, right?
Yeah.
And then number 3 would be know yourself.
Yeah.
But you went another direction.
Yeah. I mean, you should know your music, and you definitely should know yourself, but you also should know the realities of being an organist. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel. Now people, of course, would like to know about you a little bit more and want to visit your site. Can you give our listeners a link where they could find you and your work online?
Sure. So you can find a link to my recordings on SoundCloud if you search my name, Daniel Segner. I also have a Facebook page, which is Daniel Segner, Organist. And you can find, I do frequently do my concert announcements. I'll sometimes take pictures of the organs that I'm playing around the city. And you can find that, I believe the link is just facebook.com/Dan Segner. And I'll give a link to you and easy to click on from there.
Facebook, SoundCloud. What is the address of your church? Does it have a website address?
Yes, I believe it's just it's St. Mark's Episcopal Church. It's St. Mark's Glen, Ellyn, all one word. So this is in Glen, Ellyn, Illinois. So it's stmarksglennellyn.org, and I will send you a link to that as well.
I will put everything into the show notes.
Perfect.
So thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Real virtual cappuccino together, right?
Yeah, of course. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love your podcast.
Great. I'm sure our listeners will be inspired to become better organists at getting to know their instrument really well and become really good at one thing, right? Become like top number one or top maybe number 2 in the world of something, right? And then, of course, as you say, number 3 was
be an advocate for your instrument. Be an advocate
with outsiders, of course. Never forget that they don't know everything, and become an advocate of organ art. Yes,
exactly.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I hope we meet again and keep creating, keep sharing your work. It's so inspiring.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate it.
If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog, Secrets of Organ Playing, at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Pinkevičius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.